When I discovered his mother had been dead for 5 years, I felt the ground collapse beneath me. 25 years of lies crumbled before me like a sandcastle. Good afternoon, my dears. I'm Eleanor Rose Smith. I'm 82 years old, and today I'm going to share with you a story from my life that completely changed my destiny. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing my words reach so many different places. I was born in 1943 in a small town in Kentucky called Hope Springs. It was a simple place where everyone knew each other. My father was a shoemaker and my mother a seamstress. I grew up watching my mother create true works of art with her black Singer sewing machine, those old pedal-operated machines. I learned to sew early. By 10, I was making small repairs, and by 15, I was helping my mother with wedding dresses for young women in town. It was during one of those dress fittings that I met Joseph. He was the cousin of a bride for whom we were making a wedding dress. Joseph came to our house to deliver a message from the family, and, as they said back then, it was love at first sight, at least for me. He was tall, dark-haired, had a well-trimmed mustache, and a way of speaking that left me breathless. He was 25, worked as an accountant at the only bank in town, and everyone considered him an excellent catch. After that day, Joseph began to appear at our house frequently, always with a different reason, but I knew it was to see me. My mother noticed too and kept an eye on us, always present in the living room while we talked. In those days, a respectable young woman wasn't left alone with a young man, no matter how respectable he seemed. And Joseph seemed to be the most respectable man in the world. We dated for 2 years. Sunday meetings in the town square after church, always accompanied by one of my 4 brothers. Visits to my home, where we had coffee with cornbread in the living room, under the watchful eye of my parents. It was a beautiful courtship, as courtships were in those days, without touches beyond holding hands, without kisses, except for a few stolen ones when no one was looking. In 1962, when I turned 19, we got married. It was a simple ceremony at Hope Springs First Baptist Church. My light-colored dress was made by my mother and me. We worked on that piece of satin and lace for months. I still keep it, yellowed by time, but still as beautiful as the day I wore it. At our wedding, I met very few of Joseph's relatives. He said he had a small family. His father had passed away when he was a teenager, and his mother, Mrs. Virginia, was his only close relative, besides some distant cousins who didn't even attend the wedding. Mrs. Virginia was there, a thin lady with gray hair tied in a tight bun, dark dress, and a gaze that seemed to evaluate me all the time. We didn't talk much. In fact, I don't think we exchanged more than 10 words that day. "Take good care of my son," was what she told me before leaving right after the ceremony. She didn't even stay for the small reception we had. Joseph explained that his mother didn't like noisy environments and preferred the tranquility of her home. After the wedding, we moved to Louisville. Joseph had secured a transfer to the bank's central branch, and I was excited about the idea of living in the city. We rented a small apartment in the Highlands neighborhood, and I began to dream about the life we would build together. I wanted children, a home of our own. I wanted to be happy beside the man I loved. In the first few days, I noticed something curious. Every Monday, without fail, Joseph would set aside some of his clothes, especially white work shirts, put them in a small suitcase, and say, "I'm taking these to my mother to wash." I found it strange. After all, I knew how to wash clothes very well. My mother had taught me all the secrets of good washing and was very proud of my ability to remove any stain. "Why does your mother need to wash your shirts? I can do that perfectly well," I said, a little offended. "Eleanor, my mother has been washing my shirts since I started working at the bank. She has a special way, uses a bluing agent that makes whites whiter and an iron that only she knows how to use. It's a tradition of ours. I don't want to hurt her feelings by taking that away from her," Joseph explained, with that smile that always disarmed me. I accepted, of course. Who was I to question a tradition between mother and son? Besides, I wanted to do everything to please my mother-in-law, to earn her respect and hopefully her affection over time. In the first few months, I suggested visiting Mrs. Virginia several times. I wanted to get to know her better, establish a closer relationship. After all, she was the mother of the man I loved. But Joseph always found an excuse. My mother is very reserved, Eleanor. She doesn't like receiving visits, especially without notice. Then let's give notice. We can set a Sunday to have lunch with her. She doesn't like cooking for more than one person. It's been that way since my father died. She prefers solitude. I can cook. I'll bring everything ready. Eleanor, you're not understanding. My mother has peculiarities. She values her privacy a lot. That's how she raised me, respecting her space. If we pressure her, she'll only distance herself more. And so it went, week after week, month after month. Joseph would take his clothes to his mother on Mondays and bring them back impeccably washed and ironed on Tuesday or Wednesday. I took care of all the other clothes in the house, but the bank's white shirts were Mrs. Virginia's exclusive territory. In 1964, we had our first child, Mark. It was immense joy. I thought the birth of the grandson would make Mrs. Virginia come closer, but it wasn't quite like that. She sent a small gift, a hand-knitted wool bootie, but didn't come to meet the baby. Joseph visited her with photos of his son and said she had been emotional but wasn't feeling well enough for visits. She's getting old, Eleanor. She has problems with her legs, difficulty moving around. One of these days I'll bring her here when she's feeling better. That day never came. 2 years later, we had our daughter, Mary. The same ritual was repeated. A little gift sent, no visit. I started to worry about the situation. It was strange that my children didn't know their own grandmother. I questioned Joseph a few times, but he always had a ready answer. My mother was never one to show affection, Eleanor. She raised me that way, with distance. It's not out of malice, it's just her way. She asks about the grandchildren, she worries, but in her own reserved way. Time went by. Our marriage continued peacefully. Joseph was a good husband, affectionate, hard-working. He rose in the bank, receiving promotions. We managed to buy our own house, a nice 2-story home in the Cherokee Park neighborhood. I took care of the children and the house, did some sewing work for the neighbors, led a life that many women of the time would consider ideal. But that Monday ritual continued. The suitcase with the white shirts, the visit to Mrs. Virginia. Over the years, I tried everything to get to know my mother-in-law better. I suggested celebrating her birthday at our house. Joseph said she didn't like parties. I suggested visiting her at Christmas. He said she preferred solitude during the holidays, that they were dates that saddened her because of her husband's absence. I suggested taking the grandchildren for a quick visit. He said her house wasn't suitable for children, full of dangerous stairs and fragile objects. And so 25 years passed. 25 years of marriage, watching my husband leave every Monday with his little suitcase of clothes to visit a mother-in-law I barely knew, whom my children had never seen. Mark was already in engineering college, Mary finishing high school, dreaming of studying medicine. I was already 44, some wrinkles beginning to appear, the first strands of white hair that I disguised with homemade dyes. It was during this time that the seed of suspicion began to grow inside me. I can't explain exactly what changed, but I started to question the whole story. How was it possible that after so many years, I still didn't properly know my husband's mother? How could it be that my children had no relationship whatsoever with their paternal grandmother? On one of the Mondays in May 1987, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I decided to follow my husband. I needed to understand once and for all what happened during these weekly visits. To meet my mother-in-law, even if uninvited. That morning, I told Joseph I was going to the market and then visiting a friend who wasn't feeling well. He left with his little suitcase of shirts, as he always did, and I waited a few minutes before leaving too. I took a taxi and asked the driver to follow the bus where my husband had boarded. What happened next, my dears, is something that still pains me to tell, even after so many years. But it's important to share, because that's where my journey of discovery, pain, and finally, liberation began. On that Monday in May 1987, the sky dawned gray, as if it already knew what I was about to discover. I dressed carefully. I chose discreet clothes, a simple dark-colored dress that wouldn't draw attention. I put a scarf on my head and rarely worn dark sunglasses. I didn't want to be recognized if Joseph looked back. My heart was beating so hard in my chest that I thought he might hear it. As the taxi followed the bus, my hands trembled over the worn leather purse I clutched in my lap. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror a few times, probably intrigued by my nervousness, but didn't say anything. He only asked once, "Are you all right, ma'am?" I responded with a quick nod. I imagined 1,000 scenarios during that trip. Maybe Mrs. Virginia was really that reclusive person Joseph described. Maybe she lived in precarious conditions, and my husband was ashamed to show it, or perhaps she had some disease that disfigured her, and he wanted to spare her from others' judgment. I created justifications, one after another, in a desperate attempt to calm that terrible feeling growing inside me. The bus followed a path I didn't know, toward a neighborhood on the other side of town. After almost an hour, I saw Joseph get off at a stop and start walking. I asked the driver to stop the taxi a little ahead. "Can you wait? I won't be long," I asked. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked the taxi driver, a gray-haired gentleman who seemed to understand exactly what I was doing. "Sometimes it's better not to know certain things." "I need to know," I replied, with a determination I didn't know I had. I followed Joseph at a safe distance. He walked with firm steps, like someone who knows the way well. After a few blocks, he entered a tree-lined street with simple but well-kept houses. He stopped in front of a yellow 2-story house with a small porch, took a key from his pocket, and opened the door as if arriving home. I stood paralyzed at the corner, hidden behind a tree. This didn't make sense. Joseph had said his mother lived in a small apartment downtown, not in a 2-story house in a residential neighborhood. I waited a few minutes, gathering courage to approach. I walked slowly to the house and, with my heart in my throat, peeked through the side window. The curtain was slightly open, allowing me to see part of the living room. It was then that my world fell apart. I saw Joseph embracing a woman. It wasn't Mrs. Virginia. It wasn't an elderly lady with gray hair. It was a younger woman than me, with long black hair, wearing a floral dress. They kissed in a way we only kiss someone we deeply love, with an intimacy that only exists between people who share a life. I backed away, feeling my legs weaken. I almost fell, but supported myself against the wall of the house. It was then that I heard children's laughter coming from inside. I forced myself to look through the window again and saw 3 young people entering the living room, 2 teenage boys and a girl who must have been about 16. "Dad, I brought the magazines I promised," said one of the boys, hugging Joseph. "Dad," they called him Dad. My husband, the father of my children, was the father of other children. He had another family, another house, another life. I don't know how I managed to get back to the taxi. I remember walking like a sleepwalker, tears blurring my vision, the world spinning around me. The taxi driver didn't ask questions when I got into the car sobbing. He just offered me a handkerchief and asked where I wanted him to take me. "Anywhere but home," I replied, without knowing what to do. I ended up asking him to drop me at my friend Constance's house, the only person I trusted enough to share that terrible discovery with. Constance was a widow, lived alone in a small house in the same neighborhood where I lived. We had been friends since I moved to Louisville, and she had always been suspicious of Joseph and his stories about the mysterious mother. When I arrived at her house in that state, Constance didn't need explanations. She opened the door, pulled me inside, and hugged me tight as I collapsed in tears. Between sobs, I told her what I had discovered. "I always thought something was wrong with this story," she said, serving me a glass of water with sugar. "A man who hides his mother from his wife for so many years? That never seemed normal to me." I spent the rest of the day at Constance's house, trying to understand what I would do next. I couldn't simply go home and confront Joseph. Not yet. I needed more answers. Constance suggested we investigate a bit more before any confrontation. If he lied about his family, he may have lied about his mother too, she said. Do you know where Mrs. Virginia was supposed to live, according to what he told you? Yes, I knew. Joseph always mentioned that his mother lived in a small apartment on Main Street, downtown. Never the exact address, but I could look. The next day, with Constance by my side, I went to Main Street. It was a commercial street, with some old apartment buildings on the upper floors. We entered several buildings, asking for Mrs. Virginia. No one knew her. We were almost giving up when an old man sweeping the sidewalk of a small restaurant heard us asking, Mrs. Virginia, Joseph's mother from the bank, she lived in that building over there, he said, pointing to an old building across the street. But it's been about 5 years since she died, poor thing. A sudden stroke took her. 5 years. Mrs. Virginia had been dead for 5 years. And during all that time, Joseph continued leaving with his little suitcase of clothes every Monday, saying he was going to visit her. I wanted to collapse right there in the middle of the street. The lie was even bigger than I had imagined. It wasn't just another family, it was an entire life built on lies. Constance held me by the arm, giving me strength to continue. Did you know her? I asked the man, trying to control my voice. Oh, yes. She came to lunch here almost every day. She was a good customer, always polite. She got sick with leg problems in the last years, barely left home. The son visited her frequently, until one day, well, life is like that. We thanked him and left. I walked like an automaton, letting Constance guide me. My head was buzzing. If Mrs. Virginia had been dead for 5 years, where had Joseph been going on Mondays before I discovered the other family? Had it always been like this, since the beginning of our marriage? We went back to Constance's house and made a plan. I needed to find out more about this other family before confronting Joseph. The next day, I went back to that tree-lined street, to the yellow 2-story house. I observed from a distance, hidden in a small diner across the street. I saw the woman leave with the youngest daughter, both in uniform. The mother was probably a teacher. Later, the 2 boys left with school backpacks. For 3 days, I conducted this painful surveillance. I discovered that the woman's name was Barbara. I heard the children call her by name when they passed near the diner. She was a teacher at a nearby school, from what I could understand from the conversations I caught. The children were named Robert, Charles, and Lucy. Robert, the oldest, seemed to be about 19 years old, the same age as my Mark. Charles must have been 17, and Lucy 16, the same age intervals as my children. This meant that family had existed since before my marriage to Joseph, or started right after. He had been living a double life from the beginning. 2 wives, 2 sets of children, 2 houses. How was it possible? How did he manage to maintain this farce for so long? I made more inquiries in the neighborhood, pretending to be an old colleague of Barbara's, looking for her address. I discovered they had lived there for over 20 years, that Joseph was known as a good father, a good husband, who visited the family regularly but traveled a lot for work, the excuse he gave for his absences. Each discovery was a stab in my heart. 25 years of lies. 25 years believing in a love that was shared with another. My children, who grew up admiring their father, had half-siblings they didn't know existed. On the 4th day, I made a decision. It was time to confront Joseph. I went home to the surprise of my children, who were worried about my sudden disappearance. I explained that I needed to help Constance, who wasn't feeling well. They accepted the explanation without questioning much. They were busy with their own lives, Mark with his college studies, Mary preparing for her college entrance exams. I waited for the next Monday to arrive. Joseph prepared his little suitcase, as he always did. He kissed me on the forehead before leaving, as he always did. I'm going to visit Mom. I'll be back late afternoon, he said, as he always said. I let him leave. I waited 10 minutes, then grabbed my purse and left too. But I didn't follow him to where he was going. I took a bus straight downtown to Main Street. I needed to see with my own eyes the place where Mrs. Virginia had lived and died. The doorman of the building was a friendly old man who had worked there for decades. When I asked about Mrs. Virginia, he looked at me curiously. "Are you a relative?" I'm her daughter-in-law," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. His eyes widened. "Daughter-in-law? But Mrs. Virginia didn't have a daughter-in-law. Her son never married, as far as I know." That was like a punch to the stomach. "What do you mean? Joseph, her son, is my husband. We've been married for 25 years. The doorman scratched his head, confused. "Joseph? No. Mrs. Virginia's son was named Jerome. He worked at the bank, too, like his father. Never married, lived with his mother. When she passed away, he sold the apartment and moved. They said he went south, to North Carolina. Jerome, not Joseph. My husband had stolen not only the mother's story, but even another person's identity. The fraud was complete, perfect in every detail. I felt the world spin around me again, weak legs, racing heart. The doorman, seeing my state, led me to a bench in the lobby and brought me a glass of water. While I drank in small sips, trying to regain control, he continued talking without realizing how each word destroyed me a little more. Mrs. Virginia was indeed a very reserved lady. After she got problems with her legs, she almost never went out. The son took care of everything. He was a good son, Jerome. He came every day to see his mother after work. Suffered a lot when she died. They say that's why he left. Couldn't stand the memories. A good son, the real son of Mrs. Virginia, not the man I had married. Who was Joseph after all? Who was the man who had slept beside me for 25 years? The father of my children? The man I loved? I thanked the doorman and stumbled away, with more questions than answers. I sat on a bench in the nearest square, looking at the sky that was beginning to darken, feeling that my entire life had been a lie. That night, I waited for Joseph to come home. He returned at the usual time, with the little suitcase of impeccably washed and ironed clothes. Clothes that I now knew had been cared for by Barbara, not by a mother who had been dead for 5 years. My children were out. Mark at a study group in college, Mary at a friend's house. We were alone, Joseph and I, in the oppressive silence of the living room where we had shared so many moments that I believed to be true. I looked at him, at that familiar face that suddenly seemed that of a stranger, and finally asked, "Who are you, Joseph? Who are you really?" When I asked that question, I saw something I had never seen on Joseph's face, pure panic. His eyes widened, his mouth opened and closed several times without making a sound, like a fish out of water. The color left his face, leaving him as pale as wax. He knew that I knew. There was no more hiding. "What are you saying, Eleanor?" He tried to smile, but his face only managed to produce a grimace. His eyes darted around the room, avoiding meeting mine. I kept my voice calm, although inside I was shattered. "Your mother, Mrs. Virginia, died 5 years ago. Her son's name was Jerome, not Joseph. And you have another family, in a yellow 2-story house, with a woman named Barbara and 3 children." He collapsed on the sofa as if his legs had turned to water. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling. I thought he was crying, but when he removed his hands, his face was dry, just scared, defeated. "How did you find out?" was all he managed to say. That question enraged me more than anything else. Not, "I'm sorry," or "I can explain," or even, "It's not what you're thinking, just, how did you find out?" As if the problem was me discovering the lie, not him living it for 25 years. "I followed you last Monday, saw you with them. Then I went to the building where your supposed mother lived. I talked to people who knew the real Mrs. Virginia and her son Jerome." Joseph remained silent for a long time. The room was dark now. Neither of us had turned on the lights when it got dark. Sitting in the dimness, 2 strangers who had shared a bed for a quarter-century. "You wouldn't understand," he finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "Try." Try to make me understand how you could lie to me all these years. How you can have two families, two sets of children. How you could invent a mother who wasn't yours, use the name of a man you didn't even know. My voice was firm, firmer than I felt inside. And so the confession began. A story so fantastic, so absurd, that if I hadn't been living that nightmare, I would have laughed. But there was nothing funny about those revelations that destroyed my world. Joseph wasn't Joseph. His real name was John August. He was born in a small town in Tennessee, the son of poor farmers. Without education, without opportunities, he decided to try life in Louisville at 18. He got a job as a janitor at the same bank where he would later claim to be an accountant. It was there that he met Jerome, a young accountant who worked in the loan department. Jerome was kind, polite, helped John with tips on how to behave, lent him books, encouraged him to study. They became friends despite the social difference. John admired Jerome, his education, his way of speaking, his knowledge. When Jerome mentioned he would be transferred to the New York branch, John saw an opportunity. Not the opportunity I would imagine of saying goodbye to a friend and wishing him good luck, but the opportunity to steal his identity, to become someone he never was. Jerome was reserved. Few at the bank knew him well. When he left, John began to present himself as Joseph, a name he thought more sophisticated than his own. He forged documents, invented a diploma, and gradually built a new identity. Nobody questioned much. In the 1960s, systems were precarious, verifications almost non-existent. "I wanted to be somebody, Eleanor," he explained in the darkness of our living room. "I wanted respect, wanted opportunities. As John August, son of illiterate farmers, I would never be anything. As Joseph, accountant with a diploma, doors would open, and they did." He got a better position at the bank, learned the job in practice, observing others. He was intelligent, caught on quickly. Nobody suspected. In a short time, the lie became his reality. During this same period, he met Barbara. She was an elementary school teacher, came from a simple but educated family. They fell in love, started dating. John, now firmly established as Joseph, planned to marry her, continue building his new life. Then, by a twist of fate, he was sent to my town to open a new branch of the bank. There he met me at the dress fitting of Barbara's cousin. He saw in me, daughter of a respected family, skilled seamstress, girl of good character, another opportunity for social advancement. "I didn't plan to fall in love with you," he said, as if that was a consolation. "But it happened, and I didn't want to lose Barbara. So I decided I could have both, 2 lives, 2 wives, 2 sets of children, like in a fiction book, except it was my reality. My life was being torn apart by each word coming out of that man's mouth, whom I thought I knew. To maintain the farce, he invented the story of the reclusive mother. He told Barbara he traveled frequently for work, when in fact he was with me. He told me he visited his mother every week, when in fact he was with her. He balanced between 2 worlds, 2 identities, 2 families who didn't know of each other's existence. How did you manage to hide this for so long? How did no one ever see you with her? How did you maintain the story of your mother even after the real Mrs. Virginia died? I asked, trying to understand the magnitude of that fraud. He explained with a disturbing calmness how he managed everything, how he kept the 2 families in distant neighborhoods, how he created elaborate stories to justify his absences, how he fabricated a complex web of lies that supported his house of cards for 25 long years. Mrs. Virginia's death almost unmasked him. He found out by chance when he went to her building to complete some detail of his story, but he adapted the lie, telling Barbara that his mother had died, while to me he continued the farce of the weekly visits. "And the clothes? If your mother was dead, who washed the clothes you took every week?" "Barbara," he answered in such a low voice I almost didn't hear. "She was always very good at it. I said it was for a co-worker who lived alone. She has a good heart." A good heart. My stomach turned with each new revelation. While I wondered why my mother-in-law didn't like my way of washing clothes, it was another woman, my husband's other wife, who washed them without knowing she was providing a service for her rival. The children, do they know about me, know about their half-siblings? He shook his head. Nobody knows anything, neither from there nor from here. I remained silent, trying to process all that. 25 years of lies, an entire life built on quicksand. The man I loved, whom I believed to be my loyal companion, my safe harbor, was a complete fraud. Not even his name was true. Why are you telling me all this now? Why not continue lying? I asked, genuinely curious. He raised his eyes, meeting mine for the first time since he began his confession. Because you already know too much? Because I'm tired, Eleanor. Tired of living two lives, of remembering which lies I told to whom, of managing two worlds that cannot meet. He seemed almost relieved, as if a weight had been removed from his shoulders, and that enraged me even more. While my world was collapsing, he felt lighter for no longer having to carry the burden of his lies. And now? What are you going to do? I asked, fearing the answer. I don't know. I never thought I would be discovered. I was always careful. I always planned everything. His voice was lost in the darkness of the room. Will you abandon Barbara and the children, or will you abandon me, or will you try to continue with both families now that I know the truth? He didn't answer immediately. His silence was deafening. I don't know, Eleanor. I need time to think. Time. He wanted time. After stealing 25 years of my life with his lies, he wanted even more time. No, I said, my voice suddenly strong and clear. You don't have any more time, John August, or Joseph, or whoever you are. I got up from the sofa, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. It was as if something had broken inside me. Not just my heart, but the chains that bound me to a life of illusions. I turned on the living room light, revealing his haggard face, the first worry lines, the hair that was beginning to thin. A stranger. I want you out of this house now. Eleanor, please, the kids. Mark and Mary aren't home, and when they return, I will be the one to tell them who their father really is. You had 25 years to be honest. Your time is up. He tried to argue, tried to convince me to wait, to think, not to make hasty decisions. But something had changed in me. Eleanor, who accepted his stories about the mysterious mother, who never questioned his absences, who blindly trusted the man she called husband, that Eleanor had died in that dark room. Leave now. Take only what you can carry. Tomorrow, when the kids are at school, you can come back to get the rest of your things. But I don't want you sleeping under this roof, not even one more night. There were no shouts, no violence, just a cold resolution that surprised us both. He looked at me as if seeing a stranger, and that's what I had become. A woman he didn't recognize because he had never really known me. Joseph, or John August, the man without a true name, picked up a few belongings and walked out the front door without looking back. I don't know where he went that night, to Barbara's yellow house perhaps, or to some hotel to try to plan his next move. I didn't care. When the door closed behind him, I fell to my knees on the living room floor, finally allowing the tears to come. I cried like I had never cried in my life. I cried for young Eleanor of 19, who got married full of dreams. I cried for my children who grew up with a father who was a mirage. I cried for the lost years, the sacrifices made, the love given to someone who didn't exist. I cried until there were no more tears, until the sun began to rise and the morning light invaded the living room. Then I got up, washed my face, and began to think about what I would tell my children when they came home. Life as I knew it had ended, but something new had been born inside me that night. Something that didn't yet have a name, but that would give me strength for the difficult days ahead. Tomorrow arrived like an intruder, illuminating a room that still held the echoes of my pain. I sat at the kitchen table, trembling hands holding a cup of coffee that cooled without being touched. How to explain to my children that their father wasn't who he claimed to be? How to dismantle 25 years of false memories without destroying the ground beneath their feet. I heard the key turning in the door. It was Mark returning from his study group. He always spent the night at a friend's house when the meetings ended late. My son came in smiling, the heavy backpack on his back, the bright eyes of youth that hasn't yet known betrayal. Seeing me sitting there, with swollen eyes and a pale face, his smile disappeared. "Mom, what happened? Where's Dad?" The simple question opened the floodgates of my tears again. Mark dropped his backpack on the floor and ran to me, kneeling at my side, taking my hands in his. A man's hands now, no longer a boy's, hands that looked like his father's, the father who wasn't who we thought. Your father won't be living here with us anymore, son." The words sounded strange, as if they were being said by someone else. Mark looked at me confused, not understanding. How could he? In his eyes, we were the perfect family, loving parents, united siblings, a comfortable home, a promising future ahead. "I don't understand, Mom." "Did you fight? What happened?" I took a deep breath. There was no gentle way to say it. There were no words that could cushion the blow. "I discovered that your father has another family, another house, another wife, other children, for more than 20 years. Mark's face went through so many emotions I could barely keep up. Shock, confusion, disbelief, anger. He released my hands and stood up, running his fingers through his hair in a gesture so similar to Joseph's that it hurt to see. "That can't be true. Dad would never do that." "I thought so too, son, but it's true. He confessed everything last night." And then I told him, not everything, not the cruelest details, but enough for Mark to understand the magnitude of the betrayal. I told him about the other family, about the mother who didn't exist, about the Monday lies. As I spoke, I saw his young face aging before my eyes. These other children, are they our age?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yes, the oldest is your age. Then there's one who's 17 and a girl who's 16. My siblings." The word came out as a painful sigh. I have siblings I never knew. That was just the beginning. When Mary arrived a few hours later, we had to relive it all again. My daughter reacted differently from her brother, with silent tears streaming down her face as she hugged me tight, as if afraid I might disappear too. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Joseph, or John August, I still couldn't think of him by his real name, returned the next day as arranged to pick up more of his belongings. Mark refused to see him. He locked himself in his room, loud music drowning out any sound that might come from the living room. Mary, always the bravest, confronted her father. "How could you? How could you lie for so long? Look us in the eyes every day, knowing you had other children waiting for you in another house." I didn't hear his response. I stayed in the kitchen pretending to organize the cabinets, letting my daughter have that moment. When he finally left, carrying 2 large suitcases, Mary came to me, her eyes red but drier. "He said he loves us, that he always truly loved us. And you, what did you say to him? That love isn't built on lies, and that he should give the other children the chance to know the truth too." My daughter, only 17, and already wiser than I had ever been. I hugged her tight, feeling her thin body trembling against mine. We were all broken, all trying to understand how to move forward. The following weeks were of painful discoveries. Joseph hadn't lied just about his identity and his other family. He had lied about almost everything. He wasn't a graduated accountant, as he always claimed, but an administrative employee at the bank who learned on the job. Our financial situation wasn't as comfortable as I thought. There were debts, loans taken to maintain 2 houses, 2 families. The very house where we lived, which I believed was ours, was mortgaged. I also discovered that Barbara knew nothing. Joseph finally told her the truth too, forced by our discovery. She was as destroyed as I was, perhaps more. At least I had the dignity of discovering on my own, of confronting him, of expelling him. She had to hear from his mouth, after more than 2 decades, that her entire life was a lie. I thought many times about seeking her out. I even passed by the yellow house on the bus, imagining what it would be like to knock on the door, look into the eyes of the woman who, without knowing, shared the same man with me for so many years. But I never had the courage. What would we say to each other? What comfort could we offer? I learned from Mary, who maintained minimal contact with her father in the first months, that Barbara had expelled him from her house too, that his children, like mine, were devastated, that her family, unlike mine, was large and noisy and had surrounded Barbara with support and protection. I was happy for her, even without knowing her. No one should face that kind of betrayal alone. And I had my children, I had Constance, I had some other friends who stood by me when they learned what had happened. But the nights were long and lonely. The empty side of the bed screamed with the silence of an absence that, paradoxically, I felt as a constant presence. Money quickly became tight. Joseph sent some help, but it wasn't enough. He now tried to maintain not just 2 ex-families, but also himself, living in a small rented apartment. I had to intensify my work with sewing, accepting any job that appeared. I woke up before sunrise and sewed until late at night, eyes burning, fingers calloused. Mark, seeing my struggle, got a paid internship at college to help with expenses. Mary began giving math tutoring to neighborhood children. We were now 3 adults trying to keep the boat afloat, no longer a traditional family with a provider father and a caretaker mother. It was during this most difficult period that something unexpected happened. An old client, for whom I had made her daughter's wedding dress, sought me out with a proposal. She and her husband were opening a small women's clothing store downtown and needed someone who could make alterations and repairs to the pieces. The salary wasn't much, but it would be fixed, a security I didn't have with the freelance work I did at home. "You sew like no one else, Mrs. Eleanor," she said. "And I heard what happened with your husband. A shame. You deserve better." I accepted the job, of course. Leaving home every morning, spending the day in the airy little shop, talking to different people, returning tired but satisfied at the end of the day. All of this was like a balm for my wounded soul. I continued doing some work at home in my spare time, but now I had a routine, a purpose, something to distract me from the dark thoughts that assaulted me in the hours of solitude. It was at the shop that I first heard about an adult education program being offered at a nearby public school. I had only completed what we called junior high, equivalent to middle school. I had always wanted to study more, but marriage and children came along, and then life settled into that routine of wife and mother. Now, at 44, the idea of returning to study seemed frightening and, at the same time, strangely liberating. "You should try," said Cecilia, my co-worker, a young woman in her early 20s who was studying business administration at night. "It's never too late to study, and you're smart. You'd pick up the pace quickly." I discussed the idea with my children. I expected them to find it strange, perhaps even ridiculous, a woman my age going back to school. But they surprised me. "Of course you should study, Mom," said Mark enthusiastically. "You've always wanted this, haven't you? Now you can do whatever you want with your life." Mary went even further. She brought home registration forms she got from the school office, already filled out with my information. "Just needs your signature, Mom. Classes start next week." And so, in a gesture that mixed courage and desperation, I enrolled in the adult education program. 3 nights a week, after work at the store, I went to school and sat among people of all ages, some older, many younger, to study English, math, science, history, subjects I hadn't seen for almost 3 decades, concepts I had never properly learned. It was difficult at first. My eyes, tired from sewing, had trouble reading what the teachers wrote on the board. My mind, used to worrying about domestic matters, struggled to absorb equations and grammar rules, but I clung to the studies like a shipwreck survivor to a piece of wood. It was my salvation, my chance to rebuild something that was just mine. Mark helped me with math, patiently explaining concepts that were basic to him but seemed indecipherable to me. Mary reviewed my English texts, correcting spelling errors with a delicacy that moved me. My children, whom I always believed to be under my protection, now protected me, guided me, supported me. Time passed. The wounds, although they never completely healed, began to hurt less. I learned to live one day at a time, to find small joys in the new routine we had built. Me and my children, the three musketeers, as Mary joked. Joseph, or John August, as he went back to calling himself after the truth came out, tried a few times to get closer. Not with me. He knew that door was closed forever, but with the children. Mark refused for a long time. His father's betrayal had been a devastating blow to his worldview. For a young man preparing to enter adulthood, discovering that his male role model was a complete fraud shook his deepest structures. Mary, always more conciliatory, agreed to meet her father occasionally. Quick lunches, tense conversations. She returned from these meetings quiet, thoughtful, but never regretful. "He's still our father," she would say when I asked if everything was okay. "I can't erase 20 years of memories, even knowing they were built on lies." And as for the other family, the other children, Robert, Charles, and Lucy, the half-siblings my children had never met, that was a wound that remained open, an unanswered question that hovered over us at unexpected moments. Should they seek them out, try to build some kind of relationship, or was it better to keep that door closed, that part of the story untold? I had no answers, no one did. We were all improvising, trying to find a path on a map that had been torn and mended, with important parts still missing. What I knew, with growing certainty each day that passed, was that life went on, and that I, Eleanor Rose Smith, at 44, was just beginning to discover who I really was, without the shadows of a marriage based on lies obscuring my vision. It was painful, it was frightening, but it was also, in a way I could never have imagined, liberating. At the end of that year, I completed the adult education program with surprisingly good grades. My children organized a small graduation party at home with cake and champagne. Constance came along with some colleagues from the store and 2 or 3 teachers who had become friends during the course. It was a modest gathering, nothing compared to the traditional large graduation parties, but to me it meant the world. When everyone had left, and only the 3 of us, me, Mark, and Mary, remained in the living room decorated with improvised balloons, my daughter handed me a small package. "It's a graduation gift, Mom, from both of us." I opened the package carefully. Inside was an application form for the state university. I looked at my children without understanding. "It's for you, Mom," explained Mark, "for the education program. You always said you wanted to be a teacher when you were young, right? It's never too late to fulfill dreams." I looked at the form, at the smiling faces of my children, at the simple but cozy living room of our house. The house I almost lost, the life that almost crumbled, the dreams that were buried for so many years under the weight of a false marriage. "I don't know if I can," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "I'm 45 years old. The university is for young people like you. You taught me that we should never give up on our dreams," said Mary, holding my hand. "Now it's time to follow your own advice." And so, trembling with fear but also with hope, I filled out that form. It was the first step of a journey that I didn't even know I was about to begin. A journey that would take me far beyond the pain of betrayal, to a place of strength and purpose that I never imagined I would find. When I stepped onto the campus of the State University for the first time, I felt like an intruder. At 45, carrying new notebooks in a purse worn from use, I was decades older than most of the students circulating in the hallways. Young people with their colorful backpacks, loud laughter, and a confidence I had lost long ago. I wanted to turn around and flee, return to the relative comfort of my routine of work at the store and sewing in my spare time. But I thought of my children, who had believed in me more than I did myself. I thought of the tuition, a huge sacrifice for our tight financial situation, even with the partial scholarship I got. And I took the next step and then another until I found the room where I would have my first education class. I sat in the last row, trying to go unnoticed. Impossible, of course. In a class of 50 students, I was the only one with hair beginning to gray, with expression lines marking the face. The curious looks followed me, some discreet, others not so much. I held my head high, pretending to have a confidence I didn't feel. The professor entered. Dr. Helen, a specialist in educational foundations. She seemed to be about 60, completely white hair, tied in an unpretentious bun, red-framed glasses that contrasted with her serious face. She began the class with a simple question that changed everything for me. Why do you want to be educators? What brought you here? The students began to answer one by one. Many spoke about the desire to transform lives, about the love for knowledge, about the influence of former teachers. Beautiful, idealistic answers, proper to youth which hasn't yet faced the hardships of life. When my turn came, I hesitated. What to say? That I was there because my 25-year marriage had been a lie? That I needed to rebuild my life after discovering that my husband had another family? That I wanted to prove to myself that I could still dream, even after everything? I'm here, I finally said, because I believe it's never too late to start over, to transform pain into purpose. And because, after raising my 2 children, I want to help other children find their way, even when the world seems to be collapsing around them. Professor Helen looked at me for a long moment, her penetrating eyes behind the red glasses. Then she smiled, as if she had found something she was looking for. That, she said, is exactly what makes a true educator. That simple moment was like a blessing, a confirmation that I was in the right place at the right time, despite all the circumstances that had led me there. The first months at college were the most difficult. Adapting to the pace of studies, to new technologies, computers were a mystery to me, to academic language so different from my everyday English. Many nights I cried silently after Mark and Mary had retired, feeling inadequate, foolish for believing I could compete with 18, 19-year-olds whose minds were still avid sponges for knowledge. But something curious began to happen. My life experience, which I thought was a disadvantage, revealed itself to be an unexpected source of wisdom. In discussions about child development, I had real examples from my own children. In classes on family dynamics, my personal story, which I eventually shared with some closer colleagues, offered insights that no book could give. The professors noticed some began to value my contributions, to ask for my opinion, to use my examples to illustrate theoretical concepts. The colleagues, initially distant, began to approach, first out of curiosity, then out of genuine interest, and finally out of respect. A small study group formed around me. I helped the younger ones with practical examples. They helped me with theory, with technology, with more recent references. It was an exchange that benefited everyone. During this period, my personal life was also going through transformations. Mark graduated in engineering and got a good job at a construction company. Mary entered medical school, fulfilling her childhood dream. Our financial situation gradually improved. We weren't rich. We would never be. But we no longer went through the anxieties of the first months after the separation. John August, I could never call him Joseph again, the name was part of the lie, continued to be present in the children's lives in a limited way. Over time, Mark softened his stance and agreed to meet his father occasionally. The wounds didn't completely heal, but the initial hatred gave way to a melancholic acceptance. "He's flawed, Mom," Mark told me once. "But he's still my father and he's trying to fix what he can, even knowing that some things will never be the same." As for me, I kept my distance. There was no hatred. It surprised me to discover how time diluted such a corrosive emotion. But there was also no forgiveness. Just a silent understanding that some breaks are irreparable, some paths are one way. I learned, through the children, that John August had retired from the bank and opened a small stationery store, that he lived alone, without getting involved with other women, that Barbara, the other wife he kept secret for so many years, had moved to Atlanta with the younger children, starting life away from the memories. That Robert, her oldest son, had gotten married and remained in Louisville, maintaining minimal contact with his father. This was information I absorbed without comment, pieces of a puzzle that was no longer mine, but which in some way still composed the scenery of my life. In my third year of college, Professor Helen invited me to a special project. She coordinated a support program for women in vulnerable situations, many of them victims of domestic violence, abandonment, or betrayal, and needed someone who could teach literacy classes to adults. These women need someone who understands not just pedagogy, but real life, Helen explained to me. Someone who has faced storms and come out the other side. Someone like you, Eleanor. I accepted the invitation immediately, even knowing it would mean more workload in my already tight routine. Something inside me said that this was the purpose for which I had gone through everything I had gone through. The project operated in an old house downtown, donated by a charitable foundation. There, women of all ages sought a fresh start through education, group therapy, legal and psychological support. My function was simple: to teach reading and writing to those who never had the opportunity or who abandoned studies very early. My first class had 12 women between 25 and 70 years old. Women marked not only by time, but by the brutal circumstances of life. Tired faces, distrustful eyes, hands calloused by hard work. Looking at them, I saw myself as in a mirror. Not as I was, but as I could have been, had it not been for the support network I had, the basic education I received, the strength I discovered within me. I'm not here just as a teacher, I told them on the first day. I'm here as a journey companion. I also know the pain of betrayal, the struggle for survival, the fear of an uncertain future. But I discovered that learning, that knowing, that understanding the world through words is a form of power that no one can take from us. It was the beginning of a deep relationship that transcended the simple teaching of letters and syllables. While they learned to read words, I learned to read lives, stories of courage, of resilience, of women who had fallen and risen so many times they had lost count. Mrs. Francis, at 67, learned to write her own name and cried when signing a document for the first time without using her ink-stained thumb. Joan, at 32, finally managed to read the letters her son sent from school without having to ask neighbors for help. Teresa, at 45, discovered poetry and began writing simple but poignant verses about her journey as a survivor of violence. As I taught them, I felt I was rebuilding not just their lives but my own. Each small victory of theirs was also my victory. Each obstacle overcome gave me strength to overcome mine. It was a constant exchange, a virtuous cycle of learning and healing. In my final year of college, I presented as my thesis a study on the importance of education in rebuilding the identity of women who had experienced relational traumas. I based it on the experiences I had in the project, the stories I witnessed, my own trajectory of overcoming. The examining committee was impressed with the depth of the work, with the raw honesty of the narratives, with the theoretical foundation I managed to articulate with practice. I received the highest grade and an invitation to continue the study in a master's program. At 49, when most people already think about slowing down their professional life, I was just beginning mine. I graduated in education with honors, the only student with gray hair among dozens of young people at the peak of youth. Mark and Mary were in the audience, standing and applauding when I received my diploma. Constance was also there, eyes wet with pride for the friend she saw reborn from the ashes of a failed marriage. The project with vulnerable women grew. From a small room with 12 students, we came to occupy the entire second floor of the house, serving more than 50 women in different stages of literacy and basic education. Helen invited me to be the pedagogical coordinator, a role I accepted with humility and determination. We also created a specific support group for women who, like me, had discovered prolonged infidelities or double lives of their partners. It was a very specific type of trauma that combined the pain of betrayal with the profound questioning of reality itself. If he lied about this, what else did he lie about? What else do I know? What in my life is real and what is fabrication? In this group, we shared our stories, our survival strategies, our small daily victories. We weren't just passive victims, we were active survivors, rebuilding our lives brick by brick, word by word, dream by dream. It was during this period that I received an unexpected call. It was Barbara, John August's other wife, the woman from the Yellow House. She had returned to Louisville for her son Robert's wedding and, through Mark, asked for my phone number. "We need to talk," she said, her trembling voice on the other end of the line. "After all these years, I think it's time." We met at a neutral cafe downtown. I immediately recognized the same face I had seen that fateful Monday, now marked by the years and the same pains that had marked mine. We sat face to face, two mature women who had shared, without knowing, the same man for more than 2 decades. The conversation was difficult at first, permeated by uncomfortable silences and carefully constructed phrases. But soon, the barriers fell. We weren't rivals. We never were. We were victims of the same lie, involuntary participants in the same deception. And more than that, we were survivors, women who had rebuilt their lives after the house of cards collapsed. Barbara told me her version of the story, how she met John August. For her, that was always his name, when they were both young. How she believed in the story of constant work trips. How she raised 3 children practically alone, accustomed to her husband's absences, who ironically was with my family on the days he was missing from hers. "You know what's strangest?" she said, stirring the coffee with the spoon. Despite everything, he was a good father. He was present when he could, participated in the boys' lives. Never missed one of Lucy's presentations at school. How does someone manage to live like this, divided in 2, without going crazy? I had no answer to that question. I never did. Perhaps John August was indeed 2 different men, the Joseph I knew and the John that Barbara knew. Perhaps the lie was so deep that even he no longer knew where the truth ended and the falsehood began. Before we said goodbye, Barbara held my hand on the table, an unexpected gesture of intimacy. "Thank you for receiving me. For all these years, you were a ghost in my mind, the other woman, the intruder, the destroyer of my home. But you were just like me, a woman loving the man she believed she knew." I left that meeting with a strange sense of closure, a chapter that finally closed, an old wound that, if not completely healed, at least had stopped bleeding. At 52, I published my first book, a collection of stories of women who had passed through our classrooms and support groups, interspersed with pedagogical and psychological reflections on the reconstruction of female identity after relational traumas. It wasn't a traditional academic book, nor a simple set of testimonials. It was a hybrid that reflected my own journey, part teacher, part student, part survivor, part witness. The book, to my surprise, resonated beyond academic circles. I was invited to radio programs, lectures at universities, meetings with support groups in other cities. My personal story, which for so long had been a source of shame and pain, transformed into a tool of connection with other women going through similar situations. Mark married at 30 to Anne, an architect he met at work. Mary graduated in medicine and specialized in psychiatry, perhaps inspired by the emotional scars our family carried. Both built solid lives, honest relationships, families based on truth and mutual respect. And as for the other children, the half-siblings my children never really knew, Robert, Charles, and Lucy, there were some encounters over the years, timid attempts to establish some kind of connection. They didn't become a united family. The circumstances were too complex, the wounds too deep to allow that. But there was a mutual recognition, a respect for the shared pain, a silent understanding that all were victims of the choices of a man they loved and who disappointed them. Today, at 82, I look back and see a journey that I could never have imagined when I was that young seamstress of 19, getting married full of dreams to the man I thought I knew. The pain of betrayal, which I once thought would destroy me, became the catalyst for a life of purpose and meaning. The project with vulnerable women, which began with a small literacy classroom, transformed into a respected foundation with educational, psychological, and professional programs that have served thousands of women. I officially retired a few years ago, but I still show up there almost every week for a coffee with the younger teachers, for a conversation with former students who come back to tell their success stories. My home now is small, but welcoming, always full of books, plants I cultivate with care, photographs of my 5 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. Mark and Mary visit me regularly, bringing the children, filling the environment with laughter and life. Constance, my faithful friend, passed away 3 years ago, but left me the company of her cat, a lazy Persian who now sleeps at my feet as I recall this story. John August died a decade ago, at 85, a stroke like his supposed mother. I attended the funeral, not for him, but for my children, who, despite everything, felt the loss of their father. Barbara was there too, more aged than I remembered, but with a serenity in her gaze that spoke of forgiveness. Not forgetting, never that, but acceptance that the past is immutable and that carrying resentment only poisons one's own soul. I don't know if I ever managed to completely forgive John August, but I know I didn't allow his betrayal to define the rest of my life. Instead of sinking into bitterness, I chose to emerge stronger, wiser, more compassionate with others' pains for knowing my own so intimately. And if there's one lesson I learned in this long journey, it's that our greatest wounds can become our greatest gifts. That from the ashes of disappointment can be born a higher purpose, that it's never too late to start over, to learn, to grow, to love again, not necessarily a new partner, but life itself, with all its imperfections and possibilities. And that, my dears, was my story. A journey from pain to strength, from lies that led me to discover deeper truths about myself. If this story touched your heart in some way, I ask that you leave your like on the video, subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like mine. Share it with someone who might need to hear that even after the worst betrayals, it's possible to rebuild life and find a new purpose. From an 82-year-old lady who has lived enough to know that our scars can become our greatest fortresses. Thank you very much for listening to me, and don't forget to comment where you're watching from. I love knowing that my words reach people in so many different places. Until the next story, God willing, God bless you, and remember, it's never too late to start over.